Hello and welcome to another edition of Meet the Manager from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. Today I'm joined by 2014-15 FPL winner Simon March, who has two other top 10k finishes under his belt and has only finished twice outside of the top 50k in the last 9 seasons. Simon, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Joe. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm pleased you're on. You are our first FPL winner on the Meet the Manager series. Hope to get a few more on over the coming months. But yeah, so you're the first, so that's great. So some slightly different questions for you, because not many people have won it. But first of all, let's have a look at your career, and in particular that 2014-15 season. One thing I think a lot of people want to know when they speak to people like yourself that have won it is what it takes to go from being a good manager, so you've had those two top 10,000 finishes before that, to actually making that step and winning it. So yeah, what needs to happen to actually win FPL?
Well, to be honest, you need a huge amount of luck. That's the real truth of it. We do sort of debate luck versus skill a lot in FPL, and I'm not sure that the two are necessarily as distinct as we sometimes kind of make out that they are. I think to actually win it, you have to have something unique about the way that you play, and the conditions that of that season have to almost match the way you play perfectly. So it's a sort of combination, of chance and then an element of it sort of matching your strategy. If you look at the season before I won, it was my worst season ever. The game really didn't suit my style of play, but overall, that kind of worked out to be a good thing, because I made some adjustments, but I carried on playing the way that I'd always pretty much played it, and I avoided the trap of expecting the new season to be like the previous season, and so that sort of gave me a bit of a unique advantage, I think.
So in 2014-15, what happened specifically that season that really chimed with your style of play, and also what is your style of play? So what are the key aspects of it, and what went right then to kind of marry that up with your strategy?
Yeah, so I've thought about it quite a lot, over the years since that happened, and I think there are a lot of elements to it that really benefited me. Some to do with the game, some to do with my own sort of personal circumstances that I think sort of gave me a sort of unique advantage, which we can go into a little bit later on if you like. But
definitely.
I think. So like I said, there's a lot of luck, but I think you sort of create the conditions for being lucky, if that makes sense. So I think really to win it, the difference between doing well and winning it is really sort of 4 or 5 big differential decisions, and much more than that was just consistency. So it's just being very patient, making incremental gains each week, which all add up. So like when in the Question Time article that I did the other week, when I say that consistency is the best differential, it's because consistency is the hardest thing to achieve over the course of a season. And so I think that's kind of the root of it. Really, it's not as sort of dynamic and glamorous as people would sort of expect perhaps it to be. It wasn't these crazy sort of differentials. It was just a handful of times where I moved away from the kind of herds mentality and did something different, and those really paid off. And the rest of the time, I just wasn't I wasn't going under the average very often. I was typically sort of being quite consistent and hitting 60 points plus most weeks.
So that season was 2014-15. That was the season that Chelsea won it very comfortably.
Yeah.
And Man City were also emerging as a force there, coming second. Arsenal were doing well, and to a lesser extent Manchester United and Tottenham weren't so good. So a lot of the key players would have been those Chelsea players for you, presumably.
Yeah, and that's what I mean in terms of some of the elements that really benefited me as an individual. Because I'm a Chelsea fan, and so I understand. I know the team very very well, and so that helped maybe get a bit of an insight into some of their better players. I mean, one of the best differentials that I had was that I bought in John Terry, and he scored something like 3 goals in 4 games after I bought him in, and there's an enormous amount of luck involved in that decision going right. But nobody would say that John Terry was particularly an absurd choice, really left field choice. It's that sort of I like to sort of think of them as kind of low risk, high rewards transfers. That if you make enough of them and you're consistent otherwise, it all adds up, and that gives you the advantage in the end.
So sticking with the, I suppose, the key premium players from the high performing teams, and then when you're, even though John Terry is a premium defender, but in the scheme of an FPL budget, he's relatively cheap, and all defenders are at that kind of 6-7 million mark. And making those differential moves around players like that. So I guess a good example this season would be one of his former teammates, or a current Chelsea player, David Luiz, who is netting those double-digit returns, those clean sheets and the attacking points, as John Terry did as well. So do you think that still applies to this season? I just use that as an example, but that strategy of making sure you've got those premium picks and then spotting those differentials on the kind of peripheries.
I think so. I think it's been difficult this season because players have been injured quite a lot. Aguero's been injured. Harry Kane's been injured. These are players that typically might make up the spine of your team, and that's something that I kind of really believe in. All that I kind of aim to do each season is to try and get in 3 or 4 players, sometimes big hitters, sometimes not necessarily, but players that I know are going to tick over points, over the season. And if I just leave them there, then they'll do the business, and then I can focus my transfers, much more aggressively and dynamically. I think that really is a way of gaining advantage, because just swapping between heavy hitters all the time. It's very difficult to do, for one thing, and it eats up your transfers and the moves that you can make, which are obviously a huge element of the game, is how well you use your transfers.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we'll come to specifically an amazing transfer that you've recently made a bit later for this season, which is a good example of getting that timing right and knowing when to use those precious transfers. One of the other thing I wanted to ask you about was pressure. When you were in the frame to win it, you were moving up the rankings, getting to number 1. So you're either there protecting a lead for some weeks, or you're behind the current leader, and you're starting to think, I could win this. What kind of pressure did you feel, and how did you deal with it?
So I think I was top for quite a long time. I was top for the last 15 game weeks in total. And so at some point you just adapt. I mean, it was honestly my only ambition really that season, when I was kind of knocking on the door of the top 100, was to be number 1 at least once at some point in my FPL career. And even if that was just on a Saturday evening, before the games on a Sunday, I didn't care. I just wanted to be number 1, and then just so I could say that I'd done it. And then suddenly I got to number 1, and there were a few points between me and second place, and I thought, okay, well, actually, maybe I could go on and win it. But really, it was such a I suppose privilege being number 1 at the end of every game week that. I just sort of appreciated it on that level, really, and you do adapt to it. It was, I think, the most pressure that I felt was in the last few game weeks, because I was that close, and there were fewer and fewer things that I could do. The double game weeks came and went. I used my second wild card, and that went, and suddenly, I felt like I had less agency over what was going on, and I was, when it got to the very last few game weeks, I was playing an extremely sort of dullards game. I was picking the most obvious captains and things like that, because I was trying to defend the lead. But people who were chasing me were, captaining. Somebody captained Martin Skirtle in a double game week, and he scored. And suddenly they were in second place. It was just, and this sort of seemed to happen every week. And so that kind of the pressure did build a little bit at that point, and it was kind of like, you know, when you're doing your exams and you sort of dream about your exams. I was dreaming in spreadsheets and things for a while, and for quite a while afterwards, actually. You know, I keep dreaming that it was the final game week. So, you know, I think the way that I coped with it was to have a process. So, you know, I had my strategy for playing and you know, picking players and everything, and how I, you know, analyze them, and the research that I do, and I just really invested, you know, in that, and sort of tried to keep busy, feeling that, you know, in a way that I was progressing, and I think I mean the funny thing about the last few game weeks is that it's really like a mini league, basically, but it's a mini league of about 100 people, and they're all having the, you know, the season of a lifetime, basically. So it's super competitive, and so I was just doing everything that I could at that point to get an edge. I was you know, I was reading game theory and Sun Tzu and everything, anything that would make me feel that I had some control over what was happening, and that was, you know, that was really, you know, how I kind of coped with it.
Do you know what? I think that's really interesting as well, thinking of it as a mini league. So it's like a work league almost, or a league with friends, because you start to know the names and you see the people that are still in the top 10, who's still chasing you as well. And did you have much contact? Because obviously there is even then there was an FPL community around social media, but also on Fantasy Football Scout. Did you have any contact with the number 2, the number 3, etc.?
Not before. I have since, but no, not during the time. I mean, one funny thing that happened quite a lot is that people would come on Fantasy Football Scout and ask, you know, to link my profile, because you know, they'd just got to number 5 in the world or whatever. And you know, they were looking for it to see if I was posting anything, and other people, like somebody would get to number 2 in the world and come on, you know, Fantasy Football Scout and sort of call me out, you know, in a very sort of good-natured way, but sort of, you know, be like, you know, Simon, I'm coming for you, and yeah, immediately I just sort of bookmark that person, and,
and then you turn the tables, you start following them.
And so and then, you know, I'd just, every day on my way to work, I'd just be reading, you know, whatever they posted, and I don't know if I actually got anything good out of it. I don't remember getting anything, you know, really good, because people aren't stupid. They're not going to you know, share exactly what they're doing. But again, you know, part of it is just dealing with the pressure, you know, feeling that you've got some control over it, rather than just worrying about things that you can't control. You know, doing whatever you can to you know, you know, to help make progress.
And what's it been like since? You know, how has it changed your life? And also, it's a weird one, because to the community, the people who are watching this video, winning FPL is incredible. It'll be one of the most incredible things that could ever happen. But to most people in the world, it means absolutely nothing. You can say you've won FPL to them, and they'll go, I don't know what that is, and I don't care. But what's it been like for you? What has it been like immediately after you've won it, and, you know, carrying on since? I mean, the very fact, you know, years on, you're still being interviewed by people like me.
Yeah, I mean, it has been pretty amazing. I mean, you know, I'm not going to, you know, film premieres and hanging out with Taylor Swift or anything, but it is, you know, it has. Yeah, I've got to do a lot of things that, you know, I hadn't done before, and I certainly wouldn't have done, you know, otherwise. And you know, being on the TV and radio and on Scoutcasts and you know, things like that. You know, I've got to write a bit. I've been interviewed by a few newspapers. You know, so there is quite a lot of interest in you know, winning Fantasy Premier League in the mainstream. You know, not just on, you know, sites like Fantasy Football Scout, where I had, you know, that's what I really thought the fantasy football community was. I knew that it was played obviously by millions of people, but I thought the only people that would actually care about it would be, you know, us lot, pretty much. But no, I'm really shocked, actually. I've been really shocked at how people respond to it. Even people who don't actually play fantasy football. I think there is some acknowledgement of that it is quite a big deal, and that winning it is quite a big deal. I mean, I never ever tell people when I meet them that I've won it.
You don't do it. Don't you know who I am?
No,
exactly. Trying to get into a club.
Exactly. I do sometimes when I'm, when I'm on the train or something, and there's some lads and they're talking about fancy football. I do sometimes want to just sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you know what?
Oh, I'd be so tempted as well. You wouldn't be forgiven for that.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't. It's just sort of not in my nature to do that. But people always find out, right? If I'm going to meetings or just wherever I'm going, eventually it gets around. Somebody tells people, and it's the first thing that anybody says about me as well.
Is it on your CV?
Oh yeah,
It is.
100%. Yeah.
Has it been brought up in job interviews?
Yes, it has. Yeah, and it's probably helped quite a bit with getting my last job. It definitely helped me get into I've just finished a master's degree.
Yes, we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, that's you. So that helped with that as well. So
it definitely helped me get into. I mean, they told me that it helped me get into it because it was quite a difficult course to get on, and so they needed something that stands out, and winning fancy football apparently was one of those. One of those things.
I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased because sometimes I think even though 5-6 million people play it, I feel that we're still in our world, and that the wider world recognises its importance warms my heart. What's another thing being since is how do you stay motivated? So you've won it. Yet for the next 3 seasons, 22,000, 18,000, 46,000, all within the top 50k. One in the top 20k. You're clearly still having good seasons, and you're having another good season as well this season. So, how are you staying motivated?
Well, I'm probably not as motivated. I mean, you can probably tell looking at my season history when I was most motivated. It didn't always equal a good finish. That's definitely true. But you can see in my history when I discovered Fantasy Football Scout and things like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think for me, because I obviously never dreamed that I would win it. I never really thought about winning it at all. And for me, FPL was always a place where I could sort of test out stuff that I'm interested in more generally. So if I wanted to learn something new, like I'm going to sound like an absolute nerd, but if I wanted to learn about statistical method or something, right? Fantasy football is something where you get that immediate feedback, so you can see actually if it's working, and it's got a huge data set as well. So if you quite like doing things with data like I do, then it's a really good environment for doing that. And so now I probably do 1 or 2 quite low key experiments each season, and they don't always work out, and sometimes my rank probably suffers as a result. But the way that I look at it is that if you can't liberate yourself from having won it, then
is there a particular example you can give where you've experimented with a player or something like that?
Yeah, it's typically things like testing for different horizons, different wildcard strategies, different chip strategies, and things like that. This season, one that I tried that actually worked out quite well was held on to my wildcards and worked to a sort of 1 game week horizon. So I would just work bring in whichever player I thought would perform best in this next game week. I wasn't saving my transfers or anything. I was just playing a really, really aggressive sort of game. And knowing that I had the wild card to bail me out if it all got too horrible and went too wrong. And I don't know if other people play that way, but I'd certainly not tried playing that way before. And so now it's things like that sort of keep me interested in it, because like I said, it's a good environment for learning how to do other stuff that might be useful in life, but also it's on some level, I think you want to kind of conquer the game, right? You want to sort of understand it, and that's essentially what we're all trying to do is sort of tame this untamed beast, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
So you tamed it 1 year, but you want to tame it more years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want it, but if I'd really sort of if I'd really conquered it, I'd win it every season. And so You just want to learn something new about the game. You want to find a new way of playing, a new strategy, something that's going to be useful to you and to other people. And ultimately, it's kind of there's such a strong community around FPL now. I mean, it always was a strong one, but now the amount of information that's shared, the amount of different strategies that you get, it's something that you want to contribute to, and it certainly helped me. It helped me win, so it feels only sort of fair that that I should be able to contribute back.
Just looking at the strategies that you use, there's a couple of things to mention. One is what you've already mentioned, that you're actually kind of experimenting with certain tactics as well and strategies. But also another strategy I noticed is that you don't take a lot of hits. You haven't taken a lot of hits this season. I don't think you have in previous seasons as well. So just if you can just let us know what influences your decisions, especially around taking hits and transfers, but also things like what type of stats you follow, for example, because obviously you're very knowledgeable about data. So what is the data that really motivates you to get a player in or get a player out?
Yeah, so so when it comes to stats, so I do use stats. I'll talk about what I look at in a sec. But what I find with fantasy football is, at least in the first half of the season, you don't really have a kind of critical mass of data to make really good decisions. A lot of the time you're sort of looking back and saying, okay, over the last 3 game weeks, this player had more shots in the box or was more attacking, or something like that. But these probably aren't very reliable. What you when it comes to around this time in the season, this is when I really start to quite enjoy it, because it started to take shape, and you can actually start to use this data in a meaningful way. I think at the beginning of the season, when you're looking at the previous year's data as well, that's another area where I look at stats a lot. But I tend to, more than I look at stats, I tend to look at attributes, so player attributes.
Okay.
And so I sort of pick out the key ones and think, how well is set up is this player to score well, and that would be things like, well, first of all, are they nailed on? Do they play in a team that will create or convert chances or keep clean sheets? I think the biggest amplifier of value is the team around a player, and how the player fits into that team. So, for example, if Paul Pogba was loaned to Huddersfield and started playing in the double pivot, he probably wouldn't be half the FPL player that he currently is. So I typically look at the team first and then the player. And the perfect player for me has multiple ways to score. So attacking defenders are a classic example of this, but also players on set pieces. Are they able to score even if they're not actually performing well? And what I'm aiming to do here is sort of deconstruct the factors and the basic conditions that affect the player's likelihood of scoring, and make sure that they're as favourable as possible. Fixtures is obviously another massive element to it. And but before, when I was very serious about FPL, I used to look at this in sort of formula form. So I'd assign a value to each player for whatever attribute I was looking for, and then I'd multiply it by various other attributes and divide it by things like rotation risk and fixture difficulty. And ultimately, the idea is to kind of bring it down to one number that you can just compare each player with, and then you pick the player with the highest score. It's a very sort of labor-intensive way of approaching it, and I don't do it anymore. But once you've sort of looked at the game for long enough in that way, it's hard not to. It's hard to see it any other way. It
becomes instinctive. I suppose on a very basic level, a penalty taker, because one of the things you mentioned was, can a player get me points if him and the team aren't playing well? Well, a penalty taker can. Because a penalty can happen at any time. So I guess it's that narrowing the odds, really. It's looking at those attributes, and perhaps they might not score, but they're also quite a good assister as well. So that's why, for example, I guess Sane and Sterling at Man City are great players, because they can score and assist as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the players, the FPL players that absolutely sort of fit the archetype are players like Robin van Persie, Frank Lampard, Sigurdsson at his best, David Silva, Mata when he was a player. These are players that will sort of tick over points every week. If they don't score, then they'll probably assist. And those are the kind of players that you can put in your team and keep them there for most of the season, injury permitting. And then as I was saying before, then you can use your transfers much more proactively. You're not chasing after some player that you feel that you have to bring in. You're just sort of riding the waves with one player. I mean, I think Hazard is a classic example now that this season he's probably gonna hit 200 points or something, but he doesn't necessarily score every single week. But if you kept him and captained him, you wouldn't be far off sort of Salah levels of points. I haven't looked at where they are currently.
It's a point that we raised on the Scoutcast this week with Hazard in particular. Is he's a player you've just got to have all 38 weeks or not at all, because he will get a huge points haul at the end of the season, but it'll be largely focused around 7 or 8 game weeks where he'll get these huge scores. So you've got to try and get him for those, which probably on your strategy he starts to ebb away a bit, because then that's a negative for him. But of course, over the season he'll do well. So you mentioned your university work that you've been doing. So you've just completed some research in behavioural economics. So this hasn't been published yet, so you can't go into too much detail. But briefly, what is that, and how can it be related to fantasy football management?
So behavioural economics, maybe the way to best describe it is to compare it to sort of traditional or neoclassical economics. And traditional economics is largely based on the assumption that everybody behaves as if they were rational. So ultimately, you can predict people's behavior because it will always be the most rational form of behavior, and that underpins economic theory for a century or more. What behavioral economics or behavioral science acknowledges is that people are often not rational, and in fact they're often systematically or predictably irrational. So in short, we've all as humans evolved to instinctively display certain biases, which throughout history has helped the human race survive, but in the modern world can be quite detrimental in terms of our decision making and our behaviors and the quality of our choices. And this includes obviously your FPL decisions. And so I think it's been said already in this series. People have mentioned that there's a lot more the accessibility and usability of information has improved enormously in FPL, and so the advantage that you actually gain from being good with data or good with analysis has actually been reduced by people like you and me, who share a lot of information. But there's also a behavioral element, and I always like to think of fantasy football as a game. I also think of poker like this. In some respects, it's a game that you play against yourself. It's how disciplined you can be, and then taking the advantages when they come. And so, actually, sort of controlling these biases can have a real benefit to the way you play FPL. And there's a phrase that Rory Sutherland, who talks about this in some of his TED Talks, that he says that the next revolution will be psychological, not technological. And the idea is that the advances and the difference in the way that we exist as a result of technology, that will be in this next phase. It'll be how we manage our biases and the efficiency that we can gain from what they call choice architecture. So structuring the environment to help people make better decisions. And so what I thought. So as you mentioned, I wrote my thesis partly on some of these biases, but that's still being reviewed. So I don't want to talk too much. Talk too much about it.
Just there's an example of how that can be related to. I mean, it sounds obvious to some degree when you're saying that. Obviously, because fantasy football management is all about managing those biases. and you're doing that all of the time. For example, I didn't get Aguero in this game week, in game week 25 rather, when he's done very well, because I had a bias that I didn't think he would start twice, and I didn't think he would perform well away from home. So there's would that be an example, just one example of that behavioural economics in action in fantasy management?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think something that's probably affected a lot of people, this week is loss aversion. So there's a sort of a general rule that people fear losses about twice as much as they value gains. So, it means that we overlook opportunities for fear of losing out. And in FPL, this sort of manifests itself in situations such as where you have a player that that you should probably get rid of, but you keep him because you're worried that he's going to explode points in the next game weeks. And we're so focused on the loss that we don't see the opportunity. It's also a factor in in points hits. You mentioned earlier on that I don't take many points hits, and actually it's probably a real flaw in my game that I'm not that I don't have that element to it, because some people, I think Mark is a good example of this. I think Mark takes points hits and he sees very much the opportunity, whereas I see it very much in terms of the loss. So I think that's a weakness actually in the way that I play it. But there's a sort of flip side to that. When you're talking about risk preferences, and it's called the what the heck effect. So we're more likely to take risks following a loss, and this is what I think a lot of people are going to feel perhaps after this game week. And it's the sort of sense that I took a risk, it didn't work out, so now I might as well go and take a bigger risk, or keep taking risks. And that's how you end up doing a sort of getting into a downward spiral of points hits and risky captain picks and various other things following a bad game week. So the way that you can sort of, or the advice I suppose around these things is you can try and be objective about risk and reward values. It's actually very difficult. There's quite a lot of debate as to whether you can actually really consistently change people away from these biases, because they've evolved over millions of years. They're so deep rooted. I mean, like I say, I've been studying this, and I will still be subject to all these biases. Even though I understand them, I've read loads about them, and I understand them very well. And so the other area that they look at is, okay, well, if you can't change the way that people think, people respond to their environment. So you change the environment, and then you elicit a more positive response. So one thing that you could do if you find that you're taking too many hits, for example, is say, okay, at the beginning of the season, I have say 5 hits that I can take over the whole of the season, and that's it. And then it becomes part of your strategy. It sort of becomes like a chip. And so you're using
changing
it
the
as
rules
part of
to yourself. You look at the game and think, well, how can those rules, as you said, the environment, better suit how I play? And obviously a restriction, as there is, say for example in the Sky game, you get 40 transfers a year, and that's your lot.
Yeah, it means you're doing things strategically rather than as a emotional response, which is ultimately what you're trying to reduce in this thing. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to control your biases, and that's why sort of 99 point whatever % of what we actually do is just reflexive. We don't think about walking or breathing or anything like that. Because we'd go absolutely crazy. The human mind just can't, cope with that. And so, we create these things, these heuristics. They're called. They're basically a shorthand way of coping with large amounts of information and complexity and uncertainty. And you see them all the time in fantasy football, and they're not necessarily always wrong. I mean, things like never take a hit for a defender is a classic FPL heuristic. Is it true or not? Who knows? But it's something that sort of simplifies judgments down. And so yeah, that's one element. There's I can talk about another one,
Okay.
which I think is quite close. Is the law of small numbers, or it's called, or the representativeness heuristic. So the law of large numbers, you might know, is the rule that the larger a sample, the more accurately it will reflect the overall population. But humans are wired to make judgments based on small samples of information. So we have a tendency to exaggerate the importance of a single, instance or example of something. And this happens all the time in football. For example, there's a point in every season when we all buy Theo Walcott, right? And I got to be worried because the Man City Everton game is actually going on at the moment, right? So for all I know, Theo Walcott's just scored a hat-trick, but assuming that doesn't happen, he's quite a good example, because Theo Walcott, why do we all pick him? It's probably because we all remember him scoring a hat-trick on the last day of the season, or some other time. I think he scored 3 hat-tricks. And so it's very easy to remember that. It's very easy to access that piece of information. And so it's very influential on how we perceive him. But actually, if we break it down and say, well, actually, Theo Walcott, there's not a lot else in his data to suggest that right now he is a good pick. But
yeah, I haven't fallen. I've addressed that personal bias of mine, and this season I resisted Theo Walcott. But I've fallen into another trap with Gylfi Sigurdsson, but for similar reasons, because I remember all the good times. Yet the data did say he probably won't do very well this double game week, and I think they're right. And this is actually the second time I've fallen into that. So I'm not learning with him at all. I think all that bias I've unleashed, I've got rid of around Walcott has just manifested itself in this Icelandic guy. But yeah, no, you've made me think about that.
It's something that we tend to do. I mean, if you think, we do it a lot at the beginning of the season. So if you and I were to write down, say, 3 players, budget players that have performed really, really well in their first season in the Premier League, I think there's a good chance that we'd probably all pick, roughly the same players, and one of them would probably be Michu. And because we remember him, what was it? He scored at least a brace on his first day, maybe a hat trick. And so, he's always the example. He's always the thing. So when we look at players like Diego Jota, who's doing really well now, but didn't at the beginning of the season, we look at him and we and somewhere in our minds we're thinking, well, Michu hit the ground running and really exploded. And so, why can't Jota be the same? And it's this, it's using these sort of small samples and exaggerating their applicability to the wider.
I can completely see that, and I think that's probably I haven't got Jota in, and perhaps one of the reasons I haven't, even though he's a very consistent scorer for excellent value that enables other fantastic moves, is because I do remember those opening games, and perhaps it is. I didn't even think about it. This is like a counselling session of fantasy football. I hadn't realised that maybe I am thinking about Michu. Right.
Well, it's also, it comes in the eye test as well. I think when we talk about the eye test, what are the parameters of this test exactly? Is the player actually really attacking, or do I just recall, watching a match and this player's got forward maybe once or twice, and I'm remembering those 2 instances, and that's, I'm exaggerating that in my mind, and therefore I'm attributing this player the attribute of being very attacking. And this is why I think, it's certainly not a eye test versus data debate, because both have value and both can be massively subject to biased interpretation. But I do think that on some level you have to make a judgment based on some objective data, and avoid that sort of subjective response that you get. Sorry, go
I
on.
was going to say, right, the season that you won it, 2014-15, I know you were based in Southeast Asia there. Am I right in thinking that you saw less games that season?
Yeah, and I've often wondered if that actually had an effect. Sorry, my headphones just come out.
That's all right. That's all right, I can mark that down.
All right, I can hear you again now.
Okay, yeah, if you just say that again, if you just repeat that line,
Sure.
I often wonder if it.
Yeah, I often wonder if that had a beneficial effect, because I wasn't watching a lot of games. I was traveling a huge amount. I only watched two games the whole season, and so and I didn't watch any highlights or anything. So I think that on some level that really helped. People would assume that it's a disadvantage, but it's I was much more sort of coldly objective about things. I didn't do things like so. For example, uh, you one of the things that we often do is we bring in players that are playing for our team because we want to all we want to watch the match, and we want that player to be playing so we can root for them to score. And we do the same when there's a big game on TV or whatever. And it's very difficult to get rid of those players. It's very difficult to in my case, for example, to go to Chelsea and not have Eden Hazard in my team, because I don't want to sit there and not be wanting Hazard to score. That's just absurd to me as a football fan. And so being away from it all meant that I was much more objective. It was much more stats based, and I could make those hard decisions without really having to worry about it. I mean, most of the games were happening in the middle of the night, so they were happening whilst I was sleeping a lot of the time. So it just didn't worry me.
So you haven't also got what we have now is where when you're on social media, you can follow the game, you can chat to people about it in the community. You don't have that because you're unconscious, so you just can't do it. I guess also whilst you're removing a potential source of valuable information of the eye test, you're also removing a potential source of bias as well. So you're not even giving yourself those biases because you're not even watching the matches. I must admit I'm quite similar. I listen to a lot of football, Premier League football. I do watch matches and I do watch highlights, but on the whole I prefer to actually listen to the games because I can do other things then. You kind of not transfixed for 90 minutes, and I don't know, maybe that takes something away because I don't have the eye test, I have the ear test instead. But at the same time, maybe that's also taking away some potential for bias as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to sort of put it into the wider context, though, I remember that Tom Fenley, who won it the year before me, said that he watched as much football as he possibly could, and so he won that season, and that really helped him. And I know that there's a lot of managers who watch a lot of football. I watch a lot of football, but I don't typically use it as a basis for making fantasy football decisions. I think it enhances fantasy football enhances the enjoyment of watching football when you've got a player that's playing, but I don't typically use it as a sort of proving ground for my decisions. So
Okay.
but that's just a personal sort of perspective, I think.
Well, let's move on to the current season. We're going to put up your game week 25 team as it is at the moment. We're recording, as you said, during Man City's game with Everton. Obviously, a key name pops out there, Aguero. And I find this quite interesting because there are types of managers like me, as I've explained, who didn't get Aguero in because of my particular biases. And there's managers like you that did get Aguero in and captained him. So what was behind that decision?
I think, going back to what I was saying before, it's a very sort of typical transfer for me. It's that sort of low risk, high reward transfer that I'm always on the lookout for. And like I say, I think to do well, you pretty much just need a handful of those each season. I mean, because you can't say that it's a real genuine risk because we all know what Aguero is capable of, and but he hasn't done it in a while. So I knew that he probably wasn't going to be in a lot of teams, and or rather, he wasn't going to be captained by a huge amount of people. so it seemed like a really good opportunity to jump the ranks, and touch wood, so far it's really paid off. There was also the factor that I wanted to be in a position to be able to move him to Aubameyang. So I think when I've come on the Scoutcast and stuff in the past, I talked a lot about flexibility as the sort of the hidden value in a good season, because you don't see it obviously translate into points, but it does. It just kind of does it behind the scenes. And so I wanted to be able to bring in a premium striker, in 1 or 2 game weeks time. So Aguero was a good placeholder for that. But I mean, realistically, it also illustrates the luck element of it as well, because it could just as easily have been Sterling score a hat trick, or Sané, or De Bruyne. So I don't think I can pat myself too much on the back for it. But it's quite nice that it happened, in the sense that it illustrates very much the kind of transfer, or the kind of differential that I like to go for.
Yeah, no, that's why I brought it up, really, because as you said, Aguero, from his first appearance in the Premier League, I don't know if you remember it, he came on as a sub against Swansea and scored a brace, and suddenly everyone's going, oh, hello, and he's been doing that pretty much consistently ever since. So as you said, he's not a risk. But you did take Hazard out, part of the move to get him in, and this was once again. So what was your thinking about that? Because that looks to me, I mean, perhaps on hindsight, but that's always a gamble, taking away Hazard for a good fixture. So is that typical of you? That kind of that loss.
No, it wasn't. And I mentioned on Twitter, because I always post my team on Twitter, and I said that it was the hardest transfer of the season. It's and part of it was because it's completely antithetical to the way that I tend to play. As I mentioned, I like to have those kind of stalwart players that I know that are nailed on, that are going to tick over points, over a season, and are going to deliver. And I tend to be quite patient with them. And so it definitely wasn't out of a loss of patience with Hazard at all. It was very much, I needed the money to fund Aguero. I could have got rid of Alonso and downgraded him to somebody, but there weren't many sort of. I would have needed about sort of 5.2 defender, and there weren't a lot that game week that I thought were particularly brilliant. The ones I wanted were injured. Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is the one that I want, is injured. So. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit.
No, it's not. But that's what fancy and discussing fancy teams is about, really. And so I do understand where you're coming from with that, because moving Hazard, it's not a typical move for you, but you weighed it up. And game week 27, he's not playing, and then he's got a tough fixture game week 26, and I guess a move like that, you're looking at that a few game weeks at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I bought in Sané for him. And the idea was very much, okay, well, I know that Sané is going to be very highly owned and probably going to be captained by a lot of people. So I would cover that to a certain extent. I'd also, have another player in the double game weeks. I'd be, rolling the dice a little bit in that. And I think double game weeks, if you kind of play a very disciplined style of fantasy football, which I try to do most of the time, then you have to really jump on double game weeks. These are the times where you will get, you're relying on these times in the season to really boost your ranks. So yeah, it was a risk. I mean, really, I just sort of thought, if I keep Hazard, it's very much on the belief that he's going to score against Huddersfield and he's going to outscore Sané over 2 games. And I didn't think that was very likely to happen. I didn't think that it was unlikely at all that Hazard wasn't going to. I didn't think it was unlikely that Hazard was going to score. I was almost certain that he would, but would he outscore Sané? If you break it down, you've got to say, well, Sané had 2 fixtures. Hazard was playing in, a Chelsea team that were pretty awful. I mean, the tone has changed a lot after beating Huddersfield 5-0, but this time last week, Chelsea were in a really bad place. So I thought, well, okay, if I'm keeping him just for that, and it just didn't seem a logical move. So I got rid of him, and he scored a brace. So Yeah, what do I know?
Well, Aguero's there to dry your eyes.
Yeah,
um,
exactly. I can't complain too
no.
much, can I, really?
Just before we wrap up, just looking at your team now and what you're going to be doing with it from now to the end of the season. Obviously, you mentioned blanks and double game weeks. They're obviously key for you. I don't know if do you have a vague plan around chip use as it is, or are you just waiting for more information?
Yeah, I think vague at best right now. I think this last double game week has really illustrated that, how much things change, right up to the coming the actual double game week. So I'm going to leave it as late as possible to really make a decision on those. I mean, I pretty much know how I'm gonna use my chips the same way that I do most years, and right now. I mean, one thing that I'm going to try and avoid this season, that I did last season that didn't work out particularly well, is that I think for whatever reason, started bringing in double game week players, quite early, a little bit too early, and missed out on players who had really good fixtures, and actually ended up scoring very well. I'm not going to do that this season. If it means taking points hits at the double game week, then I'll do that. But I'm not going to let one double game week dictate, 4 or 5 game
No, that's
weeks.
good. No, that's good advice, and I that's something I'm looking at as well, because I noted I missed out on lots of good players before a double game week around game week 31 or 2 last season. I missed out on a lot of good players then, and so it's something I will address too. And just finally, really, looking at team now, which players are you looking to ditch at some point, and what are the players that you're looking to get in soon?
Right now, it's probably Sané to Son this game week. Like we say, it's currently Wednesday evening, so things could change enormously. I've only got one free transfer, so Aguero will stay. I know he's got a pretty good record against Chelsea, and then it'll probably be Aguero to Aubameyang for the game week 27. When obviously City are blanking, and he'll be a good captaincy choice, I think.
Yeah. No, both smart moves. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the plan. I mean, I've got my eyes on some other players. Like I think Alonso is sort of on borrowed time. I'm really just waiting to see how things work out with Liverpool's defence, but probably I'll be shifting Alonso for a Liverpool player sometime.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time, Simon. It's been illuminating, and as I said, it's quite a rare treat really for me, and also hope the viewers as well, to get the insight from someone who's actually won it as well and is still motivated to perhaps win it again. Who knows? But for now, Simon, good luck with the coming game week, and good luck with the rest of the season.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and good luck to you too.
Thank you.